Hey there, welcome to Crimson Chronicles. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's story begins in a small town called Raven's Hollow, a place where the fog rolls in thick from the river every evening and the trees along the old county roads seem to lean in just a little too close, as if they're listening. It's the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where doors are left unlocked, and where the biggest news is usually a lost dog or a broken fence. But that was before the house on Cypress Lane became the center of a mystery that would haunt the town for generations. The house had always been there, of course. It sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, hidden behind a thicket of overgrown hedges and ancient oaks. The locals called it the Old Whitmore Place, named after the family that had built it back in the 1890s. The Whitmores had been wealthy once, pillars of the community, the kind of family that donated to the church and hosted lavish parties in the summer. But something had happened to them, something that no one in Raven's Hollow ever talked about openly. The family had fallen apart. The house had fallen into disrepair, and by the time the 1980s rolled around, the Old Whitmore Place had become a cautionary tale, a place parents warned their children to stay away from. But on a cold November night in 1998, the house on Cypress Lane became something far worse than a local legend. It became a crime scene. Detective Marcus Webb had been with the Raven's Hollow Police Department for nearly 15 years. He had seen his share of tragedies, car accidents, domestic disputes, the occasional bar fight that got out of hand. But nothing in his career had prepared him for the call he received at 2:47 a.m. on the morning of November 12th. The call came from dispatch, a young woman named Sarah who had been working the night shift for just under a year. Her voice was shaking when she spoke. "Detective Webb, we got a 10 to 54 at the Old Whitmore Place on Cypress Lane." Webb sat up in his chair, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. A 10 to 54 meant a possible dead body. The Old Whitmore Place had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. No one had lived there since Old Man Whitmore had passed away in 1981, and his children had scattered across the country, leaving the house to rot. "Who made the call?" Webb asked, already reaching for his jacket. "A neighbor," Sarah replied. "Name's Harold Banks. Lives about half a mile down the road. He says he saw a light in the upstairs window, and then he heard screaming." Webb frowned. "Screaming? From an empty house?" "That's what he said, Detective. He called it in about 10 minutes ago. Patrol units are already on their way." Webb grabbed his keys and headed for the door. Something about this didn't feel right. The Whitmore Place had been empty for almost 20 years. There was no power, no water, nothing that could explain a light in a window or screaming in the middle of the night. Unless someone had broken in, unless someone was inside. The drive to Cypress Lane took longer than it should have. The fog was thick that night, rolling in from the river and settling over the roads like a heavy blanket. Webb could barely see 20 feet in front of his car. He drove slowly, his headlights cutting through the mist, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The road twisted and turned, lined with old oak trees that seemed to lean in closer with every passing mile. He passed Harold Banks' house, a modest two-story home with a single light burning in the living room window. Harold was standing on his porch, wrapped in an old bathrobe, watching the patrol cars pass by. Webb pulled up to the gate at the end of the Whitmore driveway. The gate was rusted, hanging crooked on its hinges, but it was open. Two patrol cars were already parked near the front of the house, their lights flashing red and blue through the fog. Webb stepped out his car and walked toward the house, his boots crunching on the gravel. The Whitmore Place loomed before him like a ghost. It was a massive Victorian mansion, 3 stories tall, with a wraparound porch and a turret that rose above the tree line. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the roof sagged in places, but there was still something grand about it, something that spoke of a time when this house had been the center of Raven's Hollow society. Webb approached the front door. One of the patrol officers, a young man named Derek Miller, was standing on the porch, his flashlight trained on the ground. "What have we got?" Webb asked. Miller looked up, his face pale. "We searched the ground floor, Detective. Found a body in the living room." Webb's stomach tightened. Who is it? Miller shook his head. We don't know yet. No ID, no wallet. Female, maybe mid-30s. Looks like she's been dead for a few hours. But that's not the strange part. Webb frowned. What's the strange part? Miller hesitated. She's wearing a wedding dress, detective. A vintage one, and she's holding a bouquet of wilted roses. Webb felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped past Miller and pushed open the front door. The house smelled of dust and decay. But beneath that, there was something else, something floral and sweet. It was the same scent he had noticed in the driveway, a faint perfume that seemed to hang in the air like a ghost. He walked into the living room. The room was large, with high ceilings and ornate crown molding. A fireplace stood against the far wall, its mantle covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center of the room, lying on the floor, was the body of a woman. She was dressed in an old-fashioned wedding dress, yellowed with age, the fabric delicate and lacy. Her eyes were closed, and her hands were folded across her chest, holding a bouquet of roses that had long since withered and died. There was no blood, no signs of struggle. She looked almost peaceful, as if she had simply lain down to sleep and never woken up. But there was something else in the room that made Webb's blood run cold. On the mantelpiece, propped up against the dusty mirror, was a photograph. It was old, faded, the edges curled and yellowed. It showed a bride and groom standing in front of a church, smiling at the camera. The bride was young and beautiful, her hair piled high on her head, her dress flowing around her like a cloud. And she was wearing the same dress that the dead woman was wearing now. Webb picked up the photograph and studied it closely. The groom was a young man, tall and handsome, with dark hair and a confident smile. He looked familiar, but Webb couldn't quite place him. He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in elegant script, was a name and a date. Eleanor Whitmore, June 12, 1921. Webb felt the air leave his lungs. Eleanor Whitmore had been the daughter of the original Whitmore family, the one who had built the house. She had died in 1921, just days after her wedding. The official story was that she had fallen down the stairs, a tragic accident that had devastated the family. But there had always been rumors, whispers that something else had happened, something darker. And now, nearly 80 years later, here was a woman wearing Eleanor Whitmore's wedding dress, lying dead in the living room of her family's house. Webb spent the rest of the night at the Whitmore place, watching as the forensic team worked their way through the house. The woman in the wedding dress was taken to the county morgue, where an autopsy would be performed the next morning. Webb had already called in a favor with the medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Harlow, a no-nonsense woman who had been working in Ravens Hollow for over 20 years. She promised to have the results by noon. By sunrise, the house was swarming with investigators. They searched every room, every closet, every corner. But the house was a maze, full of hidden passages and secret rooms that had been sealed off for decades. The Whitmores had been a private family, and they had gone to great lengths to keep their secrets hidden. It was Webb's partner, Detective Laura Chun, who made the first real discovery. She had been searching the attic, a vast, dusty space filled with old furniture and trunks, when she found a trapdoor hidden beneath a faded rug. She called Webb up to the attic, and together they pried open the door. Beneath, it was a narrow staircase, leading down into darkness. Webb grabbed a flashlight and descended first, his heart pounding in his chest. The stairs creaked beneath his weight, and the air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, he found himself in a small room, no larger than a closet. The walls were lined with shelves, and on the shelves were dozens of boxes, each one labeled with a date and name. Webb pulled one of the boxes off the shelf and opened it. Inside were photographs, old ones, black and white images of people he didn't recognize. There were letters, too, yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant and flowing. He picked one up and read it. My dearest Eleanor, I cannot bear to be apart from you any longer. The days are endless, and the nights are worse. I think of you constantly, of your smile, your laugh, the way your eyes sparkle when you speak of the future. I know that your father does not approve of me, but I do not care. I would give up everything for you, everything I have, everything I am. Please do not let them separate us. We were meant to be together, you and I. I will wait for you as long as it takes. Until then, I remain, as always, forever yours. Thomas. Webb read the letter twice, his mind racing. Thomas. The name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. He looked at the date on the envelope. June 10th, 1921, 2 days before Eleanor Whitmore's wedding. He pulled out another letter, then another. Each one was addressed to Eleanor, each one signed by Thomas. They were love letters, passionate and desperate, the words of a man who was willing to risk everything for the woman he loved. But there was something else, too. A subtext, a sense of danger. Thomas was afraid of something, afraid of Eleanor's father, afraid of the family that seemed to control her every move. Webb placed the letters back in a box and looked at the others. There were dozens of boxes, each one filled with letters, photographs, and personal effects. It was a treasure trove of Whitmore family history, a history that had been hidden away for decades. But why? What was the family trying to hide? The autopsy was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Webb was in the observation room, watching through the glass as Dr. Harlow worked on the body. The woman's face was still peaceful, her eyes closed, her hands folded across her chest. She looked like she was sleeping, not dead. Dr. Harlow began her examination, her movements precise and methodical. She took blood samples, examined the woman's hands and feet, and carefully removed the wedding dress to examine the body beneath. Webb watched in silence, his stomach churning as the doctor made her notes. Finally, Dr. Harlow finished and stepped away from the table. She looked up at the observation window and motioned for Webb to join her in the examination room. He entered the room, his face pale. "What do you have?" he asked. Dr. Harlow sighed and removed her gloves. "No signs of trauma, detective. No bruising, no fractures, no internal bleeding. Her vital organs are all in good condition. There's no evidence of poisoning, no drugs in her system. In fact, as far as I can tell, she was perfectly healthy." Webb frowned. "So how did she die?" Dr. Harlow hesitated, her eyes troubled. "That's the thing, detective. I don't think she did die. Not in the way we usually think of death, anyway. There's no medical explanation for her condition. It's almost as if she simply stopped living." Webb stared at her. "What does that mean?" Dr. Harlow shook her head. "I don't know, but I do have one other piece of information. The woman you found in the Whitmore house. She wasn't the only one." Webb's heart skipped a beat. "What?" Dr. Harlow walked over to a table on the other side of the room, where a second body was lying under a sheet. She pulled the sheet back, revealing the face of a young man. Dark hair, handsome features, dressed in an old-fashioned tuxedo. "Found him this morning," Dr. Harlow said quietly, "in the attic of the Whitmore house. The officers who searched the attic must have missed him. He was hidden in a trunk, and he's wearing a vintage wedding suit." Webb's head was spinning. "Who is he?" Dr. Harlow pulled out a small leather wallet from the evidence bag. His driver's license identifies him as Thomas Bennett, born in 1922. But here's the strange part, detective. Thomas Bennett is listed as missing. He disappeared on June 12, 1941, the day he was supposed to get married. Webb felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Eleanor Whitmore, Thomas Bennett, both of them had died on the day of their weddings, decades apart, wearing vintage wedding attire in the same house. He was looking at a pattern that stretched across 2 generations. And if the pattern was still continuing, then somewhere out there, another wedding was about to take place. Webb spent the next few days digging into the Whitmore family history. He visited the local library, the historical society, and even tracked down a few distant relatives who still lived in the area. What he discovered was a story that seemed almost too unbelievable to be true. The Whitmore family had been cursed, or at least that was what the locals believed. The curse had begun with Eleanor Whitmore, the young woman who had died on her wedding day in 1921. She had been deeply in love with Thomas Bennett, but her father had forbidden the match, arranging instead for her to marry a wealthy businessman from the city. Eleanor had been heartbroken, and on the night before her wedding, she had written a letter to Thomas, begging him to come and take her away. The letter had never reached him, and on the morning of the wedding, Eleanor's father had forced her into the dress and escorted her to the church, where the groom was waiting. But the wedding had never taken place. Eleanor had collapsed at the altar, dead within minutes. The official cause of death was heart failure, but the rumor was that Eleanor had taken her own life. She had poisoned herself, determined to escape a future she couldn't bear. The family had covered it up, and the story had been buried, along with Eleanor's body. She was buried in the Whitmore family plot, wearing her wedding dress, holding a bouquet of roses. And then, 20 years later, Thomas Bennett had disappeared. He had been last seen on the day of his wedding, wearing a vintage tuxedo, heading to the church to marry his bride. He had never arrived. His body had never been found. Until now, Webb's mind was racing. The timing was too perfect, too deliberate. It was almost as if someone or something was recreating the events of the past, over and over again, generation after generation. But why? And who was the mastermind behind it all? He needed more information. He needed to talk to someone who knew the Whitmore family, someone who had been there, someone who remembered. Webb tracked down Eleanor Whitmore's great-niece, a woman named Evelyn Crane. She was in her late 80s, living in a nursing home on the outskirts of town. She agreed to speak with him, though she made it clear that she didn't have much time. "Everyone in my family believed in the curse," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "The Whitmore women, they were destined to die on their wedding days." It was a story that was passed down from generation to generation. My grandmother told me about it when I was a little girl. She said that Eleanor's ghost haunted the house, looking for her lost love. She said that anyone who tried to marry into the family would be doomed. Webb leaned forward. "Do you believe that?" Evelyn sighed, her eyes distant. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I do know that 2 other women in my family died on their wedding days. My Aunt Margaret in 1953, and my cousin Rebecca in 1978. Both of them dropped dead at the altar. The doctors called it heart failure, but we knew. We all knew." Webb felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Why didn't anyone ever investigate? Evelyn shook her head. Because no one wanted to know the truth. The Whitmore family was wealthy, powerful. They had connections. They could make things disappear. And the curse, well, it was easier to believe in a curse than to face what might really be happening. "And what do you think was really happening?" Webb asked. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. "I think someone in the family was killing them. I think someone was making sure that the Whitmore brides never survived their weddings. And I think that person is still out there, waiting to strike again." Webb returned to the Whitmore house with a new purpose. He knew now that the deaths weren't coincidences, they were murders, carefully planned and executed to look like accidents. And he knew that the killer was still out there, still targeting the Whitmore family, still perpetuating the curse. He began to dig deeper into the family's history, searching for any connection, any pattern that might lead him to the killer. And that was when he found it. Hidden in a secret compartment in the attic behind a false wall was a diary. It was old, the leather cover cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, the same handwriting that had been used in the love letters. It was Eleanor Whitmore's diary. Webb carefully opened the diary and began to read. The entries were filled with the hopes and fears of a young woman in love, a woman who was trapped in a life she didn't want. But there was something else too, a secret, a terrible secret that Eleanor had kept hidden from everyone. June 5th, 1921. "I have discovered something terrible. My father, the man I have trusted and loved my entire life, is not the man I thought he was. He has been taking young women from the town, luring them to the house, and doing unspeakable things to them. I heard him speaking with one of his friends, a man named Mr. Crowley. They were laughing about it, laughing about the suffering they had caused. I don't know what to do. I am trapped here in this house with a monster, and no one will ever believe me." June 10th, 1921. "Thomas sent me another letter today. He is so sweet, so loving. He wants to take me away from all of this, to start a new life with me. But I cannot leave. I cannot let my father do these things to anyone else. I have to stop him, even if it costs me my life." June 12th, 1921. "I have made my decision. I will not let my father hurt anyone else. I have hidden the diary, and I have written a letter to the authorities explaining everything. But I know that my father will find out. I know that he will try to silence me. So I have a plan. I will wear my wedding dress, and I will go to the church. But I will not marry the man my father has chosen for me. I will expose my father's crimes in front of everyone. And if he kills me, at least I will have told the truth. Webb's hand was shaking as he read the final entry. Eleanor had been planning to expose her father, to reveal his crimes to the world. But she had never had the chance. She had died at the altar, her truth buried with her. But the truth hadn't stayed buried. It had been passed down, hidden in the diary, waiting for someone to find it. And now Webb had it. He had the evidence he needed to catch the killer. Webb knew who the killer was. It was Eleanor's father all along, but he had been dead for decades. So who was continuing his work? Who was carrying on the curse? He traced the bloodline, searching for the answer, and he found it in the most unlikely place. Eleanor's father had a brother, a man named Silas Whitmore, who had been just as twisted and evil as his sibling. Silas had left the house long ago, moving to the city and starting a new life. But he had never forgotten the family's dark legacy, and he had passed that legacy down to his children and their children, teaching them to carry on the family secrets. The current killer was a man named James Whitmore, Silas's great-grandson. He was a respected member of the community, a businessman with a beautiful wife and 2 young children. No one suspected him of anything, but Webb had proof. He had the diary, and he had the evidence from the hidden boxes in the attic. Webb arranged to meet James Whitmore at the house. He wanted to confront him, to see the look in his eyes when he realized that his crimes had finally been uncovered. James arrived at the house looking calm and composed, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a fear that he couldn't quite hide. "Detective Webb," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "I was told you wanted to speak with me. Is there something I can help you with?" Webb held up the diary. "I know what you've been doing, James. I know about the curse, about the brides, about the murders. I have the evidence. It's over." James's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. That diary, it's just an old family story. It has nothing to do with me." Webb stepped closer. "The bodies, James, the women you killed, they were wearing Eleanor Whitmore's wedding dress. They were reenacting her death. Why? What was the point of it all?" James laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the empty house. "You think I did this out of malice? Out of some kind of twisted pleasure? No, detective. I did it to protect my family. The curse, it's real, but it's not a curse from the grave. It's a curse of blood. Every Whitmore bride who survived her wedding day, she was a threat. She could expose the family secrets. She could destroy everything my ancestors worked to build. So I made sure they never survived. I sacrificed them to protect my family. It was my duty." Webb stared at him in horror. "You killed innocent women to protect your family." James's eyes were cold. "I killed women who were threats to my family, and I would do it again if I had to, because some things are more important than the lives of strangers. Some things are worth protecting at any cost." Webb shook his head. "You're insane. You're a murderer, James, and you're going to pay for your crimes." James smiled, a twisted, sinister smile. "You can't prove anything, detective. The bodies, the evidence, it's all circumstantial. You have nothing that ties me to those deaths." Webb held up the diary. "I have this. Eleanor's diary. It tells the whole story. It reveals the truth about your family, about the sacrifices you made to protect them. The DA will have a field day with this." James's smile faded. He lunged forward, reaching for the diary, but Webb was ready. He stepped back, pulling out his gun. "Don't move, James. You're under arrest." James froze, his eyes blazing with fury. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying my family. You're destroying everything." Webb's voice was steady. "Your family destroyed themselves a long time ago, James. I'm just bringing the truth to light." James Whitmore was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The trial was a media sensation, drawing attention from all over the country. The diary was used as evidence, along with the boxes of letters and photographs from the Whitmore house. The prosecution argued that James had been carrying on a family tradition of murder, killing women who threatened to expose the Whitmore family's dark secrets. James was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He showed no remorse, no regret. He believed to the very end that he had been protecting his family. The house on Cypress Lane was demolished not long after the trial. The Whitmore family's legacy of murder was finally laid to rest, along with the house that had witnessed so much tragedy. But the curse, if it had ever really existed, was broken at last. No more Whitmore brides would die on their wedding days. No more innocent women would be sacrificed to protect a family's secrets. Detective Marcus Webb retired from the force a few years later. He moved to a small town on the coast, where he lived a quiet life, far away from the horrors of the Whitmore house. But he never forgot the case, never forgot the women who had died, and never forgot the family that had been willing to kill to protect its legacy. But even after the house was gone, even after James Whitmore was behind bars, the story of the Whitmore family refused to die. The locals whispered about the curse, about the ghost of Eleanor Whitmore still searching for her lost love, about the echoes of the past that lingered in the air. Sometimes late at night, when the fog rolled in from the river, people passing by the empty lot where the house once stood would see a light flickering in the darkness, a soft, warm glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They would hear voices, faint and distant, laughing, crying, calling out to each other. And sometimes, if they listened closely, they could hear a woman's voice, soft and sad, singing a lullaby that had been written nearly a century ago. Sleep, my darling, sleep. The night is dark, the day is done. Sleep, my darling, sleep. The battle's lost, but the war is won. The words echoed through the fog, carried on the wind, a reminder that some stories never truly end. They just fade into the shadows, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to remember. And as long as there are those who remember, the house on Cypress Lane will never truly be gone. It will live on, in the whispers of the wind, in the fog that rolls in from the river, in the dreams of those who dare to sleep too close to the place where secrets were buried. It will live on forever. Tonight's story ends here, but the echoes of the Whitmore house will linger in your thoughts, drifting softly as you drift into sleep. Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the rain carry your worries away. The darkness is safe. The world outside can wait. If this story helped you relax, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Every new episode arrives every night, waiting to help you find peace. Sleep well. You are safe. Good night.